evening. We are at a different location, and I think Michael has probably been waiting close to, I would say we've been married for going on 15 years this year. I think he's been waiting probably a good 13 and a half years for us to have this kind of a podcast and conversation, because for the first time, his wife is super excited about investment properties.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
So I did just take a class with the real estate class that I'm part of, and on Monday and Tuesday. And I came back home and I was just fired up about wanting to do more investment properties and how we can gain wealth instead of just income. So it's really been a mindset change.
When she says that, that is an understatement. She went kicking and screaming every time we even talked about looking at investment properties, because I used to drive around every Saturday with the family.
Which that's called driving for dollars.
And was looking for single family properties. But the goal for tonight, and I took notes, so if I'm looking at my phone, I'm not distracted. I'm actually quite the opposite. Because when we started talking about this, I had so much to say. I knew if I didn't have notes that I would get off on rabbit trails. So
we're going to try to break this down as easily as we can, so that this will be a series that you can start following if you and your family decide that this is something that the Lord's been asking you to do. And this is something that Michael really feels like the Lord's been asking him to do. And so he has taken every opportunity to learn about these processes. I'm doing the single family side, especially things that are on market. But Michael is, I don't want to say that he's an expert, because I think there's always an opportunity to learn, but he's really well versed in several different opportunities. So
the objective today is we're going to try to communicate so you can understand the fundamentals of single family and commercial real estate investing, kind of what they are, and just there's honestly endless opportunities in both sides, but we're just going to cover 4 for each side because we figure that's bite size and you can start there. And talk about the pros and cons of each one, kind of where they're at, and the pros and cons at the end, so you can decide where you think you best fall. And then, like she said, we're probably going to do a series and follow up on each one of these strategies and do a little 20-30 minute episode talking about each one in more detail so you can understand a little bit more. So just kind of getting started, most people start in single family.
And single family, just to be clear, so according to the state of Texas, on the different promulgated forms, so if you look on TREC, that means the Texas Real Estate Commission, what they're doing is they've allowed the public to have access to forms that can be used in court in case of a litigation issue. So that's what the word promulgated means. It means that it has been made public. So if you would, if you've ever bought a house or gone through the process of purchasing a home, you probably are familiar with the 1-to-4 residential family contract. What that means is it's a single up to a four-door space. So after you go past 4, that's considered multifamily commercial. So 1-to-4 is what most of us that own a home, we've gone through. And then, of course, once you go past 4, but that's where it got its name. If you're wondering why is it called 1-to-4,
4 doors.
That's what it means.
Commercial. So start talking about starting investing in single family and what is investing in real estate. Investing in real estate is purchasing a real asset, some sort of land, house, duplex, single family, triplex, quadplex, commercial, anything like that, and then renting it out or using it in a form to make more income than what it costs you to either pay for the note or make income versus what it costs you to buy. I.e., if you bought like a $20,000 or $30,000 piece of land, you put some gravel on it for maybe $5,000 or $10,000.
You've improved it,
and your total all-in cost, let's say, is 35 and 10, so you're at 45K. And then maybe you rent out spaces for people to park 18-wheeler trailers while they're waiting, and you make $2,000 a month. Maybe it's, $10 a day or something per trailer, and you're able to fit all these trailers on there, whatever. So $2,000 a month times 12 months is $24,000. So you basically had a 50% return, a little under that, but about a 50% return on your investment. You spent 45 and you made 24 minus taxes and insurance and stuff like that. But essentially you had made 50% on that money in the first year, which is really good return, right? Whereas your checking account may get, a quarter of 1%.
And that's something really simple to do. I know people don't think about that, but in this series, I really hope that he is able to articulate the many, many different opportunities that you can get into. It just depends on how much risk you're willing to put in for the reward. So the greater the risk, the higher the reward.
So you have a risk tolerance, and that gets in here in a minute. But basically, your investment portfolio comes down to your risk tolerance, your comfortability with real estate, and how passive or active you want to be.
You said a word, portfolio. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Portfolio, you'll hear that in different investing contexts, but it's basically, a portfolio used to be like a big folder, right? And think of the folder holds a bunch of sheets of paper. So like each investment's like a sheet of paper. So your portfolio is all your investments, whether that's stocks, bonds, whatever, or real estate, or collector cars, or baseball cards, or gold, or silver, whatever you collect or invest in. That constitutes a portfolio. In real estate, when they talk about a real estate portfolio, it's typically all the actual properties, real assets.
Any kind of asset
that they
that's appreciating.
own that is in that bucket, or usually it's in an LLC, or it could be in a trust, which we could talk about in another episode, because setting up and how you buy it is very important.
Very different. Mm-hmm.
But so the reason why would you invest in real estate? There's actually a lot of reasons, and then we'll get into the specifics. In general, real estate, as Megan's already mentioned, over a longer period of time, there are ups and downs in smaller market, in smaller time increments, but overall real estate pretty much always appreciates. I think the average of the last 75 to 100 years is about 3%, a little less than that maybe, maybe 2 and some change.
And something just to fully disclose, there is absolutely no guarantee that a property will appreciate within a certain amount of time. What I did learn in the investment class that I just took was that if you're willing to look at a property and think about it in terms of at minimum of 5 years, especially if you're considering a buy and hold, which we'll get into those different categories. But if you're considering that, just to think about a 5-year term minimum.
Yeah.
Minimum.
On a buy and a hold.
Yeah.
In most real estate assets, there are classes and there are types that are months, and there are some that are weeks. And we can talk about those. Sorry if you heard Life Flight flying over. They fly over every night.
Every day.
But we can talk about those. But in general, real estate investing, you're talking years of investment. So it's not quick. And it's slow, incremental, gradual gains over a longer period of time, but it's traditionally a very stable asset. Mm-hmm. And they always talk about the best time to buy a house was 10 years ago. Because usually 10 years ago, you think about the price, it was usually pretty much always cheaper than where it is now.
And I want to add to that. So with the class that we took, like I said, I'd mentioned before, the greater the risk, the higher the reward. If you're thinking about real estate properties, you think of the different classes. So there's class A, B, C, and then wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Something that I learned in the investment class is if you're looking for something that would appreciate, you would want to look in the area that is wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And our instructor, I love the way he said it. He said, drive around in your car, go to the neighborhood that you would feel like even if you had a gun, you wouldn't feel safe in, and buy a property there, is what he said.
And those markets, I'll add a caveat, those markets tend to be the most volatile. Mm-hmm. So they appreciate, but when the market turns down, they can also depreciate very fast. So you're usually the leading indicator. And you can also invest in an A and a B class if bought properly, because they will appreciate at a faster clip typically than a C, lower B, C, or even a D. And so there's ways that you can hedge, but you got to learn your market, which we'll get to later. But so first of all, we're already starting, so let's just talk about single family real estate. So most people start with single family because it's the easiest to get into. Most people are familiar with single family. They've lived in a home or some of the sort, rented or lived in one. They know what it generally takes to maintain one. Therefore, it's a lot easier to wrap their mind around. The financing or the purchasing is more
I was actually going to
traditional
talk about the pros and the cons.
and is more traditional to what people are accustomed to. There can be more exotic stuff when you get into commercial. You can also do a little more exotic stuff with single family, but we can cover that in another episode.
Let's clarify the word exotic, because we have walked into single family homes and there have been some pretty exotic scenarios that we've seen.
When I say exotic, I'm saying not traditional, not like going down to the local bank in the corner and getting a loan. There's a lot of other ways that you can purchase single family homes and commercial property.
I call the commercial property the Wild West because there's no rules.
There are a few, but they're not nearly as many as single family.
Very little rules.
There's so they typically require, single family homes typically require less capital to get into. And there's usually a very high demand because people always got to live somewhere. And most people's
I'm working
goal
on 2 rentals right now.
for clients, most people are their life goal is to have a single family home. So that's pretty much always a goal. And if you buy right, i.e. 322 brick in a certain style of neighborhood, right, 1,500 to maybe 2,000, 2,100 square feet, there's always going to be a market for that. Because people that are downsizing when their kids leave are about that size. And people that are getting their first starter home are maybe even starting out in a wood frame, going to a brick home, or people that have maybe dual professional incomes, have a little bit higher range of income, they can start out in those homes. So knowing what are the most high demand homes in the market for multiple areas and the most affordable insulates you from bumps up and down on the road, right? If you're buying a 5,000 square foot home as an investment, that could go great in an increasing market, but as soon as that market turns, those are going to be the first homes that are walked away from. Whereas people in an A may move to a B, people in a B may move to a C, and C may move to a D, and D may move to a, wouldn't touch it, and the wouldn't touch it may go to a trailer park. But you always have, if you buy in that sweet spot, you pretty much always have a clientele that's willing to buy it. And so it's about knowing your local market and knowing what's there.
Or asking your
local real estate professional.
Local real estate professional to help you.
There also are a lot of tax advantages with single family that you can capitalize. I will let my lovely bride talk about that.
No, one of them that, so again, full disclosure, you have to understand that
You're not a financial expert or a tax accountant.
that too. Yeah, no, but
but these are just ideas to whet your appetite to want to go look at different avenues of why you should invest.
Yeah. So one of the ones that stuck out to me in the investment class, which again, Michael has been explaining to me for the past umpteen years, but the one that was most attractive to me was the 1031 exchange. So what that means is, to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know I might get this wrong. A 1031 exchange allows you to resell the current rental, whatever profit you make from that, invested into another property within that same year, so that you can defer capital gains tax. Can you explain what capital gains is?
So long-term capital gains, there's long-term and short-term capital gains tax, but long-term capital gains tax is typically an asset that's been owned over a year, either a stock or anything that you own. You bought it and you sold it for a profit, and whatever the delta between what you bought and sold it for, so you bought it for 100 and you sold it for 150 because you fixed it, that 50,000 that you increased the value, that is considered it's called long-term capital gains that you end up paying taxes on, which is different than your earned income. And so if you can defer that, you don't lose that money. So I think depending on, what year when you're listening to this, it can be about 25%. So that means like a quarter out of every dollar that you earn, you have to give to the government. which is not attractive because the whole point of why you're doing this is to try to raise some funds, right?
Yeah.
So you want to think about long-term or you want to think about capital gains. And so a 1031 exchange, basically, if you, same scenario, you bought it for 100, sold it for 150. If you put that 50,000 back into another real estate asset in a prescribed time period, which is typically 6 months to a year, then the gains get rolled into that property and you defer actually paying the taxes on it. So in theory, you could indefinitely keep rolling those in where you don't have to pay them initially. Like, you don't have to pay them. You can keep rolling it forward and multiplying.
Did you want to talk about the mortgage interest deduction?
Not yet, because I want to actually talk about the first strategy, because that's the whole reason why you do this, which is called a buy and hold. A buy and hold is like that. Let's say you bought an asset for $100,000 and you put 15, 20, 25 grand into it.
This is not what some popular fixer-upper couples do that are on HGTV. That is called a fix and flip.
Which we'll cover in a second.
We will cover, but
So
this
buy
one
and-
is if there were two stepsisters, this would be the ugly stepsister. The fix and flip is the pretty stepsister, because our professor called this the non-attractive side of investing.
Well, it's not sexy and glamorous, but it's actually the closest thing on single family that builds longer-term wealth.
That's why.
Because it's not pretty and glamorous. It's like putting in a 401k. It's not pretty and glamorous for 35 years, but when you get to the end, you're like, wow. That's what a buy and hold is. Think of a buy and hold as if it's like a long-term 401k investment. Like 5-10 year, right? Like Megan's talking about. You're putting in money up front, and typically you still want to try to buy it under market value, do repairs. Ideally, you want either a distressed property or a distressed seller. So distressed financial situation, really a distressed seller, either financially or the property, because you want to buy it under market value because you made or lost your money when you bought it.
So this isn't advice, but in your experience, whenever you've purchased a distressed property, what percentage do you try to stay under?
I personally try to buy at 70% after repair value. So if after repair value is top of market for that house when it's completely fixed up, I try to buy 70% of that value minus repairs. Why? It sounds like I'm just asking for something ridiculous, right? Well, I got to put the repairs in, and then I'm at 70%. When I go to sell it, it's going to cost me roughly 10%, which puts me at 80%. And if I can get that when I do a cash out refi, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can do a cash out refi on your home, typically between 75 to 80%, then I end up with zero money out of pocket because I can get all my money back from my rehab, from buying it and rehabbing it. And I may be out my closing costs, but you're talking a couple $1,000s versus tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
in
typically
down
closing costs so you also have to understand, just really quick, if you haven't already, closing cost is different than a down payment. Closing cost is what it actually costs to close on the loan.
All the origination
and
fees
paying for the title
prepaids and stuff
company
like
to
that.
get the loan processed, which is different than the down payment.
Which we can cover in another. The whole point of this one is to talk high level over all the
just
different
understanding
stuff.
the process.
So if you target trying to have your all-in cost around 80%, you can actually buy the house with essentially almost end up in the end no money out of pocket. Now you got to have money up front, but by the end you end up getting most of it, if not all of it, back, if you were able to buy in that strategy, which is why you would target that. Now you're going to say, Michael, that's crazy. No one's going to give me a house for that discount. Yes, we do it. I've bought houses at 40, 35, 30 cents on the dollar of what the after repair value is.
Can you explain what that means?
So if you think the dollar is 100% of the value, 30 cents on the dollar means I got it 70% off what it's worth once it's fixed up. Yeah. I bought the one we just sold was a $220,000 house when it was fixed up. It was appraised at, and we bought it for 72 and put 80 in it.
Okay, now also you have to take into consideration, this is a Bible believing podcast, so we take everything from scripture. Before we make any purchase, we always ask the Lord for wisdom. And so when Michael told me about that particular house, when we drove by it, that was the house that wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. And there were things that were issues
There
with
was
that
no
house.
floor in the house. You could walk in and fall to the dirt.
There have been some
was
exotic things that took place in that house.
Illegal activities.
Like I said, so with that greater risk came, the Lord really blessed us with the reward that came, or with the return that came from that. So any purchase, and we have another rental property in a different location, and that one in and of itself has been a blessing. So if we could give advice, we would absolutely advise you to pray before you make any decision on any home, because not only does the Lord care about the address, He cares about your well-being.
And the people that are going to move to that house.
Yes.
We got to get moving, though, because we got to cover all these topics.
Sorry.
So, buy and holds are ideal for investors looking for long-term, relatively passive income streams. Now, you are going to have to deal with the 3 T's: tenants, termites, and toilets. If you have a buy and hold, that's just the cost of playing the game.
Which,
You can hire out
talking
property
like-
management, but you can, depending on how well you do the rehab, you can pay up front or you can pay on the back end. It's your choice.
Now, I will say this little caveat. Our professor said, if you live in the area where your rentals are, do yourself a favor and manage the properties yourself. Yes, it is an extra headache, but it allows you to care more about the asset,
Right.
and it makes you more involved with the process of what's happening.
So the next strategy for single families, fix and flip, which she called the pretty sister, but basically it's the same concept. You buy a distressed property, either financially or physically distressed. Then after you get the distressed property, you want to fix it up to the appropriate level that the neighborhood can support. That's huge on a fix and flip and a buy and hold. On most buy and holds, you want them to be safe, clean, and functional, because your tenants, a lot of times, unless you're in a high-end neighborhood, they don't care if there's granite or not granite, but you spend a lot of money on aesthetics that don't matter to a tenant, and you kill your cash flow. And the cash flow is the delta between what your rent is and how much your note is. And you want to maximize your cash flow within reason, because you're going to still have to pay for repairs, you're going to have taxes, you're going to have delinquent months where your tenant moves out and you have to hold it and you're paying the note till you get another tenant. You're going to have make-readies, which means you're re-cleaning the house, cleaning the carpet. You may have to replace the carpet. You may have to touch up paint. You're going to have trees fall on the house, which we've had. You're going to have
electrical cords ripped out of
electrical cords, a tree fall and pull the electrical cords out of the house. You're going to have
pipes bust under the house.
We had water pipes bust on a house, and that was $15,000 to replace all the flooring, all the subfloor.
Animals living in the attic.
Animals that get in, and you got to deal with that stuff. So you got to make sure you have a big enough cash flow to deal with it and not be upside down on it. So you're not trying to price gouge, but you got to know what does the market support in that area, which is a rental price per square foot. What cash flow do you need to be able to set aside enough to do maintenance, and then that tells you what you can pay on your principal and interest and principal interest and taxes and insurance. And then that you can back into what you can afford to actually pay for the house.
AKA the pity payment, because we pity you, or we pity ourselves that we have to make that payment
Which
every month.
is the buy and hold. The fix and flip, you're looking at what can the top of that market withstand, or what can it hold. So if the top of the market there is granite and vinyl flooring and fresh paint and a farmhouse look, and those are the houses that are selling in 3 weeks for top dollar, that's what you have to rehab to. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. You're not rehabbing for your style. And that's what most investors, first-time investors, screw up. They rehab to what they want in the house, not what the clients in that neighborhood want. Now, you could have a neighborhood where they actually don't support granite. I've been in neighborhoods before where people want granite countertops. In that neighborhood, there wasn't granite countertops. A lot of neighborhoods, they want vinyl flooring. I was in a neighborhood, they wanted predominantly carpet flooring. You can't inject your style. You can have little bits of it, but you got to understand what is the neighborhood and what is the market demanding, and you got to give it what it wants if you want the house to sell, because it's not for you to live in.
To make smart decisions, to make wise, financial savvy decisions,
Right.
because it's a big investment.
Structural things, take care of. Your big five: roof, foundation, plumbing, HVAC, electrical. You got to take care of all those. You got to take care of those first. Most people just want to talk about the cosmetics. What color tile?
Can you say those slower one more time?
Roofing, foundation, electrical, plumbing, and did I already say foundation? Foundation. HVAC.
Roof,
plumbing, electrical, HVAC,
and foundation.
No plumbing.
You said plumbing.
Plumbing and foundation. You got to make sure those are solid. Now, it's not saying you have to replace all of them on every one, but they have to be safe and functional and non-defective. No major defects in those before you do anything cosmetic. Now, what sells the house? The cosmetic. Because somebody walks in and says, oh, I could always see myself in this kitchen. They don't care if there's good wiring and plumbing behind the walls, but bad wiring and bad plumbing behind the walls is what gets you in trouble and gets you in a lawsuit. So you got to take care of the big five before you can do anything else. Those are non-negotiables. Fix and flip, you buy it, distressed property financially or physically distressed. You fix the situation, which is why it's called a fix, and then you flip it, you put it back on the market. The idea in this is to have it renovated and back on the market within 90 days of buying it. Why? Mainly because you don't want your money tied up in it because you're trying to get it back out. And whatever analysis that you did when you bought it, you don't know what's going to happen in the market. Mm-hmm. A war could break out and all of a sudden the prices tank. Mm-hmm. Something could happen. You could have a pandemic. You know how many people I know that lost their shirt at the beginning of the pandemic because they were in the middle of a flip? Mm-hmm. I had a family. All the material was my dad was building a house and the material almost doubled overnight. Yeah. When we were working on my dad's house. And so we had to slow down the build to resource material to get the cost back down. And so it's real. Like you don't know what's going to happen. So on a fix and flip, you want the house flipped around, fixed in as short of a period of time and back on the market within 90 days.
Like we said, that only comes from the Lord. That wisdom only comes from the Lord. And I know that may be a foreign concept for people, but truly seek and ask him because only he knows what tomorrow brings.
And a fix and flip, you live and die by the price point that you bought and the quality of the contractor that you use. Same thing technically on a buy and hold because when you fix it. BRRRR strategy is the next one, and I'd already alluded to it a little bit on the buy and hold. Essentially, a BRRRR is a subset of a buy and hold because you're still buying and holding, but BRRRR stands for buy, rehab, rent it out, then you do a cash out refi, you refinance, and then repeat. So you use the same money over and over and over and over and over again.
That's what I'd eventually like to get to.
And that's where it's a form of basically you're recycling the same reserves so you can multiply your portfolio quicker. Now you have to do that with wisdom from the Lord too, because if you use the same money over and over and over and over again and you don't have proper reserves for each property, something comes through, a hurricane like where we live, and you bought 5 properties using the same reserves. Now you got 5 deductibles that got to be paid, 5 roofs that need to be fixed, 5 foundation, 5 sets of rent that you got to come up with to pay the notes, and you got to put the tenants up somewhere. So, I mean, you just got to think about it when you're doing it and how you set it aside.
Something that I learned too, which didn't work out very well for us because fortunately or unfortunately, we live in what's called a MUD, municipal utility district. So the taxes on those can tend to be higher. So if you're looking for your first rental, you would want to consider possibly finding one that's not in a MUD or in an HOA. Because
HOAs can be a pain with rentals.
HOAs can be really, really frustrating and they can be really expensive, and all of that raises your payment.
And honestly too, if you can avoid it, some people, unless you specialize in it, I would recommend not buying a rental in county where you have a septic and well. Tenants don't tend to take care of septics and wells. Toys don't do well in septics and wells.
And there's just, but
it's little things that you learn.
Yeah.
So the benefit of a BRRRR, you can purchase, you do the same thing that we just talked about, and you can use the same money over and over. It allows you to build your portfolio a little quicker with minimal upfront money relative to the number of assets that you're buying. Mm-hmm. So the last one I want to talk about in single family, and then we got to get to commercial because we're going to run short on time. The last one in single family is called house hacking, and this is more of a, I'm not going to say
house
recent.
Hacking or ADUs.
It's a more recent. Kind of, not super recent, but it is it's become more popular recent. But the basic gist of a house hack is you typically buy a property with, I say larger, usually 3 or more bedrooms, or a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex, anything that qualifies as a 1 to 4, and you essentially rent out the other parts of the asset. So you either rent out the other rooms if you're in a single family home, like a one door, like a traditional home. If you got a duplex, you rent out half of it and you try to get to where the other rent basically pays the note, so you're living for free. That's easier, obviously, if you're in a triplex or a quadplex. Even though the expenditure is higher to purchase it, you have multiple tenants that you're spreading the cost out. So essentially, your tenants are paying for you to live free. The downside is that you're living on site with the tenants, so you may get a lot more conversations if they know that's you. But
the ADU just stands for, I think it's adjacent or additional dwelling unit, but that would be something like a live-in garage, like you've converted the garage into a separate bedroom. The apartment, the apartment that comes like above the garage, maybe adding it to the property and renting that out as well. But those help subsidize utilities.
And the other thing you can do with those is those are typically still, you typically can still qualify for like FHA.
Accessory dwelling unit, sorry. I thought it was adjacent. Accessory dwelling unit.
You can typically also still qualify for an FHA via USDA, which look up USDA or call us if you want to learn about that. That's another pretty powerful tool that a lot of people don't use. Loan products where you can have low to no down payment on a lot of those, and help you get into an asset, and then have tenants at least, and even if they're not ideally right, it'd pay for all of it, but in reality you may not get there. But if 80% of your bill or 70% of your bill's paid, that's still a pretty sweet gig, right? And you got an appreciating asset that's growing every year, and your tenants are helping pay your principal down, which we can get into in single family, but I need to get into commercial. So commercial real estate investing. The key difference, so unlike single family, commercial real estate is valued based off the income rather than the sales. So why do people like commercial better? This is why. Because like I just said, during COVID, during other things, if all of a sudden the value tanks on single family, or think about what unfortunately happened in California recently, and all this area burns down, or you have a big flood, or you have something like that, and all of a sudden all the property value drops like 30%, right? Well, that stinks if you bought a bunch of rentals in there. Yeah. On a commercial, your value of your asset is based off of your operating income, your net operating income, your NOI divided by your cap rate. And so whatever the asset is producing in income ends up making what the value of the asset is.
I laugh when he says cap rate, because cap rate is just, honestly, they just pull it out of the air.
Well, there's standards that they use, but yeah, basically. There's certain.
I asked that in class, and I was like, who establishes the cap rate?
And it's like voodoo math, but basically it's like a multiple trading off the business, but we can get into that when we get into commercial. But commercial and properties in general require a higher upfront investment, but they also have significantly higher cash flows. And they also have longer tenants, so they tend to be more stable. Usually these contracts are 3, 5, 10, 15. I've even seen 20 and 30-year leases on some of the businesses I've underwritten lately. But the downside of starting out, before we get to all the pros and cons though, is that an investor must, besides the expense, but you must do your due diligence, and you have a lot bigger due diligence that you got to do.
How long is the typical due diligence for a commercial?
Depends.
I beg to differ.
It depends.
You need to ask at least a minimum of 3 months. You need to ask a minimum of 90 days.
No.
Yes, to do it correctly, because
how many commercials have you bought?
I just took a class. The professionals will tell you you need to ask for 90 days to do your due diligence, especially if you're doing a multifamily apartment complex. You need to have someone boots on the ground looking in each and every unit so that you know exactly what you're getting into.
If you're going to get a commercial, call me. You got to do it in 45 to 60 days, or they won't sell it to you at 90.
Then why did they teach it to us in class?
Because that's the theory, but the reality, when you go to buy it, they'll throw your offer out if you put over 60 days. I've had one thrown out just for putting 60 days in there.
Okay.
Over 70% of the offers I put in on apartment complexes, if they're over 60 days, they will immediately just throw them out. Because then you got to do your closing, and you're closing 60 days. They're not going to wait 5 months for the apartment to close because they're selling it because they got a problem. So you got to do it in like 45 to 60, which it's very intense. That's why I said you got to know what you're looking for. Because when you get on site, you got to know what to look for, have a checklist,
Maybe it's a maximum.
It's probably a maximum of 3 months, because 3 months from buy to close, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
that was a highlight
target.
that we had to have in our book.
That's fine in theory. It's great in theory, yeah. And ideally, I'd like 4 or 5 months to do my due diligence. But a seller, I mean, that's like me going to, anyways.
Okay.
I'll be quiet. You got to be able to do your due diligence, because if you don't, you can have a lot of challenges on those. Okay, so let's go into strategies. First one, which I just brought up, is multifamily properties. So anything commercial, anything over 4 doors or it's a business can be considered commercial. So multifamily, what's multifamily? Multifamily is anything over 4 doors, so 5 doors and more. So you got apartment complexes, which are very stable cash flow. You could have groups of duplexes, triplexes, or apartment buildings that qualify as multifamily. Provide multiple income streams from different units, so that where it reduces your exposures to vacancies because you're spreading it out. Like an average vacancy in an apartment complex is typically 5 to 10% on a well-run apartment complex. I mean, like I walked a 110 unit the other day and they had 3 vacant units. That's phenomenal. It's like 98%.
Oh, wow.
The best I've seen is like 98 to 99%. Very few of them are at 100% because you always have somebody moving out, and it takes 2 to 3 weeks to turn it back around. So you usually always have something, because I mean, think about it. You got 110 units. At least one of them is going to be turning around. If you're going to do multifamily, like apartment complexes, sorry, I got to go back to where I was at because it skipped on me, so I don't miss something for you. Like I talked to you about, the value is determined by the net operating income divided by the cap rate. So if you can reduce expenses or increase income, you can dramatically change. And like an average cap rate right now on multifamily is like 7.5%.
Yeah.
So if you're at a 7.5% cap rate, every dollar you increase on NOI increases the value of the asset $13.33. Your eyes should get really big right now, because how long would it take you to increase a home, a single family home, that 13 times?
Ideally, if you're thinking about it, increasing it by 1% every year, that's 13 years.
Right, and you can get that in a couple months by changing some structures and doing some things. So that's why multifamily is very attractive for investors, especially if you can find assets that are mismanaged. And there's a lot of people out there that think, they can manage it, and then they get in over their head, and all of a sudden they're losing. I underwrote one 2 weeks ago that the guy was losing $45,000 a month, which is why I'm saying, like, you have to know what you're doing if you buy a multifamily, because you can make a lot of money well with them, and you can, because you have a big community. I mean, think about it, you got 100 doors, like in that complex, making $400 a door per month. So that's really good revenue.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you get it going south, that's a really big loss really quick.
Yeah.
And so you got to know what you're doing. And you can start out small, right? 8, 10 unit complex, but you need to know what you're doing. But if you understand the formula and you understand how you can use that to your advantage, you can have a very large multiple very quick using basically the same strategies, buy and holds and fix and flips. It's the same thing.
You want to talk about how to get into groups or how to get the capital?
It's coming in.
Yeah.
So lenders often also offer better terms on bigger multifamily like apartment complexes because they're so stable. So you can actually get what's called non-recourse loans if it's over $1 million, which means you're actually not personally liable for the loan if it defaults. But you have a higher burden of proof that your business plan on how you're going to run it and how you're going to improve it is solid. And so they basically vet your business plan and your due diligence. Goes back to your due diligence. Yeah, it'd take 3 months, but most of them are going to laugh at you.
Just so you know, due diligence in comparison to single family is what we would call your option period.
And on a single family, you may have
10
5
days.
or 10 days to do your option period on a single family.
And I've had 5 days and I've had up to 10. I prefer up to 10.
I've had 72 hours I've done, but
3 months.
3 months already.
3 months.
I'm going to get her a shirt that says 3 months. Another asset class that you can look at in commercial is retail offices and retail and office space. These are like strip malls, right? That they have. You can buy those, build those. I know some guys that have 3 or 4 of those, and that's their retirement. They have those and they lease them out. The ones that are really well for them are like grocery stores. they'll rent out to like a major chain grocery store.
And something that's different about commercial, and this is not by any means trying to be demeaning, but unlike residential, commercial is not backed by fair housing. So commercial is really big into using the demographics and leveraging what the demographics they're looking into and how they can purposely attract certain clientele.
So depending on where you're at, just like when I said you got to know your neighborhood and how you improve, you know your neighborhood and you build a business that fits the neighborhood, and you don't have as many laws around what you can and can't put there. Now you do have zoning by a city. Right. If a city does have
City
zoning.
of Houston does not have zoning.
Well, that's what I said, depending on the city. Some cities do and some don't. But you got to understand what your zoning are, so what you can and can't put there.
Do you want to talk about multi-use?
I'm not getting super in-depth in these because I want to cover all of these.
I was just going to say one type of commercial property that was made popular by our generation was called multi-use. And that is where us millennials wanted food, workout, education, and professional all in one building. So made popular by our lifestyle that we had. But one of the biggest ones that you can think of is City Center. So at City Center, you have absolutely no need to drive a car, but you're able to get up in the morning.
Shop.
Yeah, get up in the morning, go eat breakfast, go have coffee, go to your office, work out in the middle of the day, go, run back to your apartment, shower, and then go back to work, and then home, catch a dinner all in one day and never use your vehicle. But that's been very, very popular, and it brings a lot of revenue for investors.
Well, and that's what one of the things I was about to say is a couple of these points, and then I'm going to have to go to the next one. But one of the benefits of these is called a triple net lease. Yes. And essentially the landlord shifts, once they sign the contract for that duration, almost all of the risk or all of the liability over to the tenant, even down to the maintenance. Like they're responsible for the maintenance, the utilities, the taxes, the insurance. Sometimes the tenants will sign it because they get a cheaper rent, but they're basically taking over all the other things. And they have a certain minimum standard they have to maintain on the building. Yeah. But these are also can be very hands-off for the landlords because of that. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like a set it and forget it and cruise control. Think about your big shopping centers, right? Like an H-E-B, a Kroger's, a Walmart. Like most of Walmart's property is actually leased. It's not owned. A lot of those big Targets, stuff like that, like those are big leases that those people stay for decades.
The Galleria was made by
JCPenney's, the malls. Those are actually, there's a company that owns most of the malls, which a lot of them are shutting down now. But you buy these malls and they would bring in all these department stores, and the department stores would rent per square foot. Mm-hmm. But the key on this, like Megan said a minute ago, location is key. Mm-hmm. These are driven by foot traffic, and it's sad. Like you'll see a highway come in and bypass the town, and you'll see a whole section that used to be the heartbeat of a town die over the next 5 to 10 years because the traffic doesn't go by anymore. And so just understanding what the pros and cons are of that. The next one I want to talk about, which is bigger where we live, south of Houston, industrial and warehouses. This can be for, like, we have a very heavy industrial complex around here. And so there's a lot of niches that come with that and contractors that support it. So if you can find assets that feed that niche of what they need, those companies typically will sign 5, 10, 15, 20-year leases for buildings or spaces. Also think about like the oil field. When the oil's booming, they'll buy fields just to put mats and drill pipe at closer to the drill sites so they don't have to transport as far. You can just take raw land on the side of the road that has almost no improvement, put some caliche and dirt on it, and all of a sudden you're making tens of thousands of dollars a month from a company putting down some piping and stuff. So there's other things you can do in that. Warehouses, think of Amazon.
Yeah, fulfillment centers was a big one.
Fulfillment centers, warehouses,
e-commerce.
With e-commerce, all of that.
Yeah, that's a really big one right now that we learned about.
Think of south of Dallas. You drive for like 4 miles south of Dallas. It's nothing but warehouses where it used to be farm fields. Yeah. What is that road there, I-20? Anyways, the
99?
highway, what?
Is it 99?
No, I think it goes east and west, so it's going to be an even number. I think it's I-20. Anyways, there's this hundreds and hundreds of warehouses and millions of square foot of warehouses, and those are huge. They take land that would have been considered like throwaway land and then not throwaway, but it wasn't as valuable, right? And then they turn it into
warehouses.
Another big one, talking about this, industrial stuff, but it's a medical offices. A lot of times the doctors already have enough issues with insurance and malpractice insurance and everything else. I know a lot of people that are non-doctors opening up medical offices for doctors to lease out, so they don't have to eat the cost of setting up the medical office. So, I mean, thinking outside the box and stuff like that.
I mean, now something that's been made popular are studios where people can rent out podcasts. You know, I've seen actually here in Angleton, there was a house that they've converted into professional, like, podcasting or interview space.
They stole one of my ideas.
Sorry.
It's all good. So the fourth one, and then we're going to get into wrap up. And this is what Megan was asking about earlier: syndication and REITs. I'll talk about syndications because I deal with those, and then I'll let her talk about REITs. The purpose of a syndication in a REIT is to make commercial investing more accessible for the everyday person. So syndications. The syndicator or the capital group goes out and they find, negotiate, and secure a contract for a commercial asset with a given business plan. They typically have what's called managing partners that then will be in charge of executing that plan. But before they close, between the due diligence and the close date, they'll go out and syndicate, which means they'll basically offer up people the ability to buy into that deal. And they'll typically sell it anywhere from $25, $50, $75 to $100,000 chunks for equity in the deal. Typically, the syndicators keep 70 to 20% of the deal, and then the syndicates, the people putting in the money, the investors, get the 80 to 70% of the deal. And that gets broken up proportionally to how much money they put in. Now, when they're doing a syndication, the syndicators, the managing partners, capital group, whatever you want to call them, they will talk about their business plan and their projections of what they're going to do, how they're going to improve it, how much capital they need to raise, and what their expected returns are. Then the people that are investors that are putting money in decide if they want to invest in that or not. So it takes a $7, $8, $10, $20 million purchase more feasible, right? Because somebody could take maybe $100,000 out of their 401k and self-direct it into an apartment complex and then buy into a $20 million apartment complex. And so it's just another way that they can diversify their portfolio, you hear it again, through a syndication to get some, and typically the syndications pay out quarterly, and then they have usually like a refi or a buyout around year 3 to 5. And they typically are 5 to 10 year investments that you're looking at. And think of it like a back-end loaded CD. Like you may get smaller returns at the beginning, and that's because they raise capital to improve and fix things. And so the first year or so may be little smaller returns, but then year 2, 3, 4, and 5 really take off because that's where you're realizing all the improvements that you made year 1 and 2. Because it takes time, because think about a lease is like a year long. So you may be able to fix something, but you may have to wait till these leases come around before you can fix it. If you want to talk about REITs real quick.
Yeah, just real quick. So a REIT stands for a Real Estate Investment Trust. And basically my understanding of what this is like real estate stock. So
Yes.
people are able to buy in with shares into this group of investors. And why REITs are attractive to people is because by law, the REIT has to pay out minimum of 90% of their shares to the investors that are part of the group. And there's 3 different types of REITs. There's equity REITs, there's mortgage REITs, and there's hybrid REITs. And they're all different within their own capacity. But the biggest thing is that why would somebody choose a REIT? It's highly liquid. What does liquid mean? The ability to convert an asset into cash. So how quick you can get your money. But the biggest benefits of a REIT is the amount that gets transferred back to the shareholder and what the benefit is of having those shares.
So I want to cover one thing real quick and then we'll wrap up. How do you choose the right investment for you? So I'm going to read through these so I don't get it, because I could talk, like I said, you can already tell I can talk a long time about this. So the best strategy depends on you, your financial goals, your risk tolerance, and then what you're looking for in your time commitment you're willing to put into it. If you want a hands-on investment, prefer working with individual tenants, single-family rentals, or small multifamily may be the best fit for you. Some people don't care about the returns. They just want to deal with the people, right? The returns are nice, but they just like dealing with the people. That's why single-family and multifamily is better for that.
That's why I'm going to stay on the residential side.
If they want a higher income return, more stable leases, longer term scalability.
Math, if you're numbers and math oriented, you need to understand numbers if you're interested in commercial.
You have to,
because
can't be scared
you
of
have
numbers.
to be able to scrutinize everything that's coming in and what needs to go out with commercial. And if you don't have a good grasp on numbers, and I'm not just talking about financials, I'm talking about being able to manipulate the numbers, the percentages, what it looks like, what it, the costs. You need to be able to have a good grip on that. Otherwise, you could really mess up a deal.
You could really hurt yourself in commercial.
Yeah.
But commercial is the way to go because that's office spaces, apartment buildings could be more appealing. And if you want to learn that, I'd recommend getting in a syndication or a REIT first and see it firsthand without having to do it. It's a lot more passive. It's hands off, right, as an investor. But in either one, you need to research your local market, understand that you have different financing options for them, and seek a mentorship and professional help in doing that and
He
advice.
said mentorship. Just real quick, there's a few little plugs that I wanted to put in here for this opportunity. But one of the ones that we got into about 5 years ago, was called Lifestyles Unlimited.
Yep.
And that was, what it is a network. So
Well, it's an educational
very
program.
quickly, what I learned about when getting into real estate is the importance of developing your network, developing your community, much like any other profession, especially when you're talking about an entrepreneur, solopreneur, business owner, is understanding and getting involved in a community where you have experience and someone to go to. So if you're interested in investing, it would be wise to get in groups like that. Now, you do have to buy in minimum, but it's
a fee to get in.
It's a fee to get
education
in
fee.
because they allow you to use and leverage their resources that they have.
Well, also their education. Their primary function is to educate you on the process and make you an educated investor.
And let
So
me
that
just
way-
tell you that when we first went to the first Lifestyles Unlimited conference, I literally walked around and I told Michael, these people have drank all kind of Kool-Aid. I thought they were crazy. But Lifestyles Unlimited is one of them. Another one that we just went to recently is called RIA, Real Estate Investors Association, and that's local. When I say local, that's more the Houston area.
It's Texas.
Or
They
Texas
have
in
stuff
general.
all over Texas, but they have one in Houston.
Yeah.
There's dozens of them.
Oh.
I would just say research them and make sure you find one that's reputable.
Yeah.
There's also some that are fly by night, so make sure they're reputable.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to cover the pros and cons real quick of single family and multifamily before we jump off. The pros of single family: it's a lower barrier of entry with a lower initial cost, easier financing with conventional loans and lower down payment requirements. You have a strong resale market. It's easier to sell than a commercial property. Most commercial properties are on the market for a year or more whenever you do try to sell them. You have a higher tenant demand, especially in desirable neighborhoods because people always have somewhere they need to live. Cons: you have limited cash flow compared to commercial properties because you only have one tenant paying rent. You have higher vacancy risk. When you lose that tenant, you lose all that cash flow.
Yeah.
Property values are influenced very heavily by market comps rather than your rental income. So if Joe Blow next door trashes his house and sells it for nothing, it kills your valuation and you have no control over that. And it requires a lot more active management unless you use a property manager, which cuts into your margins or your profit. And it's very difficult if you're financing a house to also pay for property management. You pretty much have to own it cash to be able to pay for property management. Pros and cons on commercial investing: you have higher income potential with multiple tenants and longer term leases. The property value is based on your net operating income, meaning the investors can directly affect the evaluation of the property, and it's less driven by the market. You have triple net leases if you're doing like commercial, retail, or mixed use, and it shifts many of the expenses to the tenant. Not all, but most of them. So it allows you to be a lot more hands
A
off.
lot less hands-off.
And then you have a lot more stability with long-term leases compared to single-family rentals. One other thing I would add on here too for multifamily is there's a lot more It's a lot easier to find property management companies and build them into the cost on a commercial deal than it is in single family, because single family, since you can't really control the market around it, so you can truly make a lot of these commercial deals hands off, or you can do syndications and get the benefit, or the REITs. Cons, you have a higher upfront cost and you have stricter financing requirements. Remember I told you it can be less liability on the individual, but more strict on your business plan. You got to have a solid business plan. It's more complex due diligence, as we talked about, 60 months over here.
I'm just telling you what they said in the book.
That's fine. That's great theory. Market demand for commercial spaces.
It's like teaching. This is the theory. This is what really happens.
The market demand for commercial spaces fluctuates with economic conditions. So that is where the economic conditions can affect you. If you drive around, particularly during the pandemic, there was a lot of storefronts that were for sale.
Yeah.
Apartments didn't really go for sale because people were struggling for homes, but some of the mixed use and some of the retail stores were. You also have, which feeds into this, when you do lose a tenant, you have a longer vacancy period, because in commercial leases, it's got to be they're usually very particular or very tailored to the individual client. So if someone moves out, it's very difficult to find someone just like that, right? And so then wrapping up, I believe in real estate investing. We believe in real estate investing. We're doing it. Well, I have for a long time. She is now.
But he's excited because it's taken our marriage talking about marriage, it's taken our marriage intimacy to another level, because for the first time in a really long time, we're speaking the same language and we're on the same vision. We've talked about that before, vision casting for your family. It keeps the idea together. It keeps the goal together.
So if I'm going to give you a little bit of homework, if you're wanting to invest in real estate, because if you're still with us, you are. Find out what you could set aside to invest in real estate, and then we'll have subsequent follow-up videos on how you could get started. But something you can do, whether you have $0 in your bank account or you got 100 zeros after a digit in your bank account, is start learning and researching your local market. I like starting in my local backyard because I understand it better than anywhere else. Even if I don't buy, if I just study it and I start seeing trends, it makes it easier to see trends in other areas once you learn your local market.
So what are some tools that you use to look at your local market? I know what I use as a realtor.
I have a bunch of different websites that I like looking, but honestly, I think the most valuable thing is just get a Redfin account and just look at Redfin trends. Get a LoopNet if you're looking at commercial. Crexy shows you commercial. There's all kinds of business training. buysellbiz.com trades businesses. There's a bunch of different ways you can see businesses for sale. You can see real estate for sale. But then start Googling. Just Google like 50 different Googles of real estate investing for sale or real estate investing groups, and let the algorithm just take over, and it'll start bringing you all these ads for investing groups, and then get plugged in with some groups. I would there's usually always one or so local meetups that are free a quarter, if not monthly. Find them and go and just see and just listen. The vernacular is different. The language is different. How they think is different. And just being around it and being around people that are thinking that way helps you understand how to think. I am going to put a shameless plug in. Join us on the next episode, and we're going to cover low to no money in to get started in real estate investing and ways you can do that.
And if you heard anything in this episode that you just want to know more about, please send us questions. We love to hear your feedback, and we would love to. I keep pimping is a bad word. I keep sending him out because he's truly passionate about this. This is something that he has taught me. He's an excellent teacher. I'm learning so that I can be a better realtor, but also just so that we can teach couples just understanding how to use an asset. It's a tool that the Lord's entrusted. A house and homes and property, those are tools that in this day and age we can help to grow your family wealth.
And we'll cover those, so stay tuned. If you have any questions or comments or specifics, you can message us or leave a comment below, and we'll get back with you on it. But we appreciate you sticking with us.
This is the Chesed Marriage Podcast with Megan and Michael Spear. We'll see you next time for another episode of Real Estate Investing. Yay!